I was in Afghanistan from 2011 to 2012, 7 months. My role there was consequence management within the headquarters of Task Force Helmand in Helmand province. Consequence management is a relatively new branch of the staff, and you can probably detect a little bit of euphemism in that consequence management role. What were the consequences and how were they managed, and what caused those consequences? So the consequences largely were civilian casualties, which is something that hampered the US and UK's efforts in Afghanistan from the beginning all the way through to now. And it reached a crescendo. The noise being made by the then President Hamid Karzai to the US particularly, and by other NGOs, Human Rights Watch and so forth, it reached a crescendo, and it couldn't be ignored anymore that we had to do something about the number of Afghan civilians that were dying as a consequence of UK-US actions, as well as partnered Afghan forces.
Well, sadly, there are never any wars without casualties. Can you give us a sense of how you feel about the operation in Afghanistan?
In terms of casualties, yeah, there can be no war without casualties. That's what war is, right? And efforts, I think we realised in 2010, not least, that efforts had to be made to minimise them. Efforts were made. Now, I don't speak on behalf of Task Force Helmand, on behalf of my old regiment. I speak only from my own personal experience. What frustrated me, especially seeing as my role was not least to make efforts on behalf of the whole task force to minimise those casualties, what frustrated me most was that while these efforts were made, they were necessarily perhaps overtaken by other priorities.
Okay, let me ask you about, here we are 20 years later, we've all seen the scenes unfolding as the US troops have pulled out, Taliban has taken control of the country. Can I ask you what your thoughts are when you look at those images?
Yep, disappointing. I think everyone's disappointed about it. What I have no experience of any more than you do is life under the Taliban. My experience is vicarious there. It's what I read and what I see on the media. And we know by the looks of things is very, very unpleasant. And Afghanistan is in for a very rough ride, unfortunately. We shouldn't neglect that for the last 20 years, life in Afghanistan has not been pleasant by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, there have been moves forward in women's education and literacy, the fact that women can go without wearing a burqa to school, to work. There have been advances which now are going to be taken backwards. But I think it would be over-optimistic to think that for the last 20 years Afghanistan has resembled a European-style democracy or one of the home counties or the 51st state of America. It's been far from that. It's been a very unpleasant existence from what I experienced in 2011, 2012.
Looking now at the images on our television screens, what lessons would you say we can learn from this 20-year deployment to Afghanistan and the consequences of withdrawal?
I can't tell you what lessons have been learned by anyone other than myself. And to be brutally honest, nothing here surprises me. If the lessons had been learned about counterinsurgency, if you want, and the end state of counterinsurgencies, what our expectations can be when we go into a country to counter an insurgency, we need only look back to the 20th century, where retreat from empire meant counterinsurgency was one of the raison d'etre of our standing armed forces. And which insurgency have we withdrawn from peacefully, and where have we left a country that's been able to stand on its own 2 feet and its citizens have been happy and healthy and secure? So lessons learned, the future will tell, but I feel quite despondent and disappointed personally.